Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in from the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. So, day 2 of spoiler season continues, and I'm already considering a second cup of coffee. So if you haven't seen my early morning quick take on the new Elder Dragon Silverquill, make sure you check that out. It's a political Orzhov commander that can do a lot of cool things. But this episode is gonna be completely different from that one. Because on this episode, I'm asking the question, is it possible to break Plargg? And also, minor note, Plargg might be the best name of this set so far. Regardless, with this episode, I'm going to be asking for your help. During the Kaldheim spoiler season, I asked you to please help me break Narfi Betrayer King. And you all came through with a ton of solutions utilizing some cards that I haven't ever even heard about, like Cormus Bell. So I know that you all will have absolutely no trouble helping me break Plargg. So let's jump into the card first. Plargg, Dean of Chaos, is an MDFC commander. Let's go through both sides, although the backside really isn't all that relevant. Plargg, Dean of Chaos, is a 2/2 Orc Shaman for 1 and a red, and he has tap, discard a card, draw a card. By paying 4 and a red, you tap and reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a non-legendary, non-land card with mana value 3 or less. Again, mana value is the new term for converted mana cost. Put all reveal cards not cast this way on the bottom of your library in a random order. Now, on the backside, we've got Augusta, Dean of Order, a 1/3 human cleric for 2 and a white. She has other tapped creatures you control get +1/+0, and other untapped creatures you control get +0/+1, and whenever you attack, untap each creature you control, then tap any number of creatures you control. Now, Augusta is actually a pretty unique card, and I might have to do a quick take on that one at some point, but again, that's not really relevant to what we want to do with Plargg. The huge benefit, though, for this being an MDFC commander is that we get access to white. So although we only really care about the front side of the card and we just need red for that, we still get white in our color identity. With that said, let's jump into what Plargg can do. Plargg essentially lets us cast one thing for free from our library. Now, if you're building this deck in a somewhat normal way, you're not gonna know what that card is. You probably will have plenty of things in your deck that are non-legendary, non-land cards that cost 3 or less. But my initial idea for this deck is that we're only going to have one card that fits that criteria. So essentially, as long as that card is in our deck, we're casting it for free. Now, to build a deck around casting one non-legendary card that costs 3 or less, it's gotta be an incredibly powerful card, right? So what in the world could that card be that is so game-ending that fits those requirements? Well, prepare yourself for a heaping pile of salt, and let's get into it. Because the card that Plargg is going to go get us and cast for free is Restore Balance. A quick disclaimer before we get any further into this episode. Restore Balance is an incredibly salt-inducing card. Do not play it in groups that are not okay with it. Balance is banned in Commander for a reason, and Restore Balance is just a balance that you can't usually cast. But thanks to Plargg, we can. Restore Balance has no mana cost, but it does have Suspend 6 for a white. It says each player chooses a number of lands they control equal to the number of lands controlled by the player who controls the fewest, then sacrifices the rest. Players sacrifice creatures and discard cards the same way. So again, most of the time with Restore Balance, you couldn't just cast this, you have to suspend it. And then you've got to wait 6 turns and everyone sees what's going on, and then everyone tries to kill you because, yeah, you're trying to cast Restore Balance. But because this card technically costs less than 3, Plargg can cast it and doesn't have to suspend it. So it's basically surprise Restore Balance instead of suspended Restore Balance. And who doesn't love surprises? In the right situation, this card is definitely a game-ending card. If you've got no lands, no creatures, and no hand, well, after this is cast, neither do your opponents. Of course, you're going to have ways to get things back, or you're just going to have other things that you don't have to sacrifice. So essentially, you're going to end up on top and your opponents end up with absolutely nothing. Now, my first question for you, and I would love to hear from you in the comments below about this, is there another card instead of Restore Balance that is an incredibly game-breaking card that can end the game that meets the requirements? Again, that would be a non-legendary, non-land card with mana value of 3 or less. So if you can think of one, let me know in the comments below. But for now, let's move forward with this Restore Balance plan. So first up, let's talk about ways to get rid of your things. Again, Restore Balance isn't really all that effective if you've got a lot of creatures on the board, a lot of lands on the board, and a big hand. But another Suspend card like Greater Gargadon can really help you out with that. It has Suspend 10 for a red, and it says sacrifice an artifact, creature, or land, remove a time counter from Greater Gargadon. Activate this ability only if it is suspended. So essentially we suspend this and then we activate our commander. With a Restore Balance on the stack, we're going to sacrifice all of our lands and all of our creatures. So when it resolves, we're going to have none of those and our opponents will lose all of theirs as well. And then there's Leave, which works in a somewhat similar way. It's an instant for 1 and a white, and it says return any number of target permanents you own to your hand. So we bounce all of our lands and creatures back to our hand, and our opponents can say goodbye to their lands and creatures. A quick note on this one, it is an Aftermath card, so you're going to be taking both of the mana costs and putting them together, so this is 6 mana. So luckily for us, this does not meet our commander's requirement. It isn't legendary, but its converted mana cost is 6, which is greater than 3. So we'll pass this card and get to Restore Balance still. And then Hellvault does have a converted mana cost of 3, but it is legendary, so it also doesn't meet those requirements. By paying 1, we can tap to exile target creature we control, and then when Hellvault is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, we return all cards exiled with it to the battlefield under their owner's control. So this helps us in multiple ways. First off, it lowers our creature count. Just by paying 1 mana, we temporarily get rid of one of our creatures. And then if we've got a way to sacrifice this, like Greater Gargadon, we can say goodbye to Hellvault and all of our creatures come back. Next up, let's talk about some cards that can help us out with our hand, or should I say not having a hand. Sabir has pay 1 and a red, tap or discard your hand until end of turn. Whenever a creature you control with power 2 or less deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So essentially this is a pay 2 mana and tap or discard your entire hand. Now normally with this you'd want to attack with some small creatures and draw a bunch of cards, but in this situation we'd just rather not have a hand. Because if we don't have a hand when Restore Balance goes off, our opponents don't either. And another legendary creature, Birgi, can also help us out with this. She has whenever you cast a spell, add red. Until end of turn, you don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. Now that is helpful, but most of the time we'll probably need the other side of this card. Because Harnfell Horn of Bounty says, discard a card, exile the top 2 cards of your library, you may play those cards this turn. Essentially, we can just discard our entire hand and get access to even more cards. And again, when Restore Balance resolves, our opponents are going to be left with absolutely nothing. And we also have a legendary creature that can help us get things back. Gerard Weatherlight Hero has, when it dies, exile it and return to the battlefield all artifact and creature cards in your graveyard that were put there from the battlefield this turn. So if we've got a way like Greater Gargadon to sacrifice all of our other creatures, we do that. Restore Balance hits and everyone gets rid of all their creatures except 1. Then we sacrifice Gerard, he gets exiled, we get all of our creatures back. Well, except Gerard. Gerard kind of sacrificed himself for everyone else. That's kind of part of the story, I think. I don't know. And also, doesn't he kind of look like Jon Snow in this art? Okay, well that's beside the point. Let's move on. Again, because our commander doesn't count legendaries, we're going to want to take advantage of that. So even just including things like Hope of Gearport in Northern Warrior can be very impactful. Hope of Gearport we can sacrifice, and until our next turn, target player who is dealt combat damage by Hope of Gearport this turn can't cast non-creature spells. So first off, we can sacrifice this and get one more creature off the battlefield. And secondly, and perhaps more importantly, this can shut off one player from playing non-creature spells, which could save us from a counterspell. And then Norn the Wary just kind of gets rid of himself and brings himself back all the time. He has whenever a player plays a spell or a creature attacks, remove it from the game, return to play under its owner's control at the end of the turn. So we cast Restore Balance and he goes away and then he comes back later. He might just be a 2-1, but a 2-1 is better than nothing. And some other low converted mana cost legendaries to consider are Livio, Oathsworn Sentinel, and Mangara of Korndor. Livio has pay 1 and a white, choose another target creature, its controller may exile with an Aegis counter on it. So if we need to, we can use this to lower our creature count. And then Mangara has tap, exile Mangara, and target permanent. So we can get rid of a pesky permanent an opponent controls, or one of our own things if we need to. Another low mana cost legendary that we might want to consider is something like Heart of Kiran. It's a 4/4 vehicle with flying and vigilance that has crew 3. It also has you may remove a loyalty counter from a planeswalker you control rather than pay Heart of Kiran's crew cost. So because it's a vehicle, it's not always a creature and can get around wraths like Restore Balance. An artifact like this one can come in really handy. And speaking of artifacts, let's talk about some non-legendary ones, but again, we're going to have to focus on ones that are 4 or greater in mana cost. So unfortunately, we cannot run low to the ground mana rocks like we normally would. But that actually might not be that bad of a thing for this deck. After all, slow and steady wins the race, and we don't really want to put a target on our back. That being said, some hyper-efficient mana rocks that we can cast later like Thran Dynamo or Empowered Auto-Generator can be great. Thran Dynamo costs 4 and it taps for 3 mana. And then Empowered Auto-Generator does enter the battlefield tapped, but we can tap and put a charge counter on it and then add X mana of any one color where X is the number of charge counters on it. So this is a mana rock that can build throughout the game. And big mana rocks like these can be especially impactful after we've blown up everyone's lands, including our own. If our opponents are lucky, they might have a few mana rocks around, but they're not going to have anywhere near as big of ones as we have. So they're going to be left with basically no mana, and we're going to have a ton. Some other artifacts that we might want to consider are Trading Post, Grafted Skullcap, and Aetherworks Marvel. Trading Post can essentially do it all. It can help us discard a card, sacrifice creatures, sacrifice artifacts, whatever we need to do. And then Grafted Skullcap has, at the beginning of your end step, draw a card, at the end of your turn, discard your hand. So we get an extra card each turn, though we do have to get rid of our hand, which is actually a good thing for this deck. Again, with a very small or no hand, Restore Balance is even more brutal on our opponents. And then Aetherworks Marvel says whenever a permanent you control is put into a graveyard, you get an energy. By tapping and paying 6 energy, look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may cast a card from among them without paying its mana cost, but the rest in the bottom of your library in a random order. Yeah, we're going to be sacrificing quite a few things with this deck. When we do, we build up a ton of energy, and then we can get things off the top of our library for free. But perhaps the most impactful artifact after we've cast Restore Balance is God Pharaoh's Statue. It says spells your opponent's cast cost 2 more to cast, and at the beginning of your end step, each opponent loses 1 life. So this not only drains our opponents, but more importantly, it slows them down to a crawl. And by slowing them down to a crawl, I basically mean makes it nearly impossible for them to recover. With all their lands gone and no hand, they're going to be top decking. So they gotta hope that they keep top decking lands, and even if they do, the spells that they're going to try to cast cost even more to cast. Yeah, there's basically no recovering from that. Now, another thing to consider with this deck is what if Restore Balance is in our hand? Now, luckily, Plargg has tap, discard a card, draw a card, which might not seem like a big deal at first, but it can really work well with some of these cards. Both Canal Dredger and Drunk Troller have tap, put target card from a graveyard on the bottom of its owner's library. And Epitaph Golem has pay 2, put target card from your graveyard on the bottom of your library. So yeah, we ditch Restore Balance and we put it back in our library so that we can get it with our commander. I'm sure there are other ways to do this, but these are the 3 that I thought of right away. Also, with this kind of a deck, you probably want to keep the board pretty clean if you can. So cards like Fell the Mighty, Dust to Dawn, and Solar Tide can come in really handy. Each of these essentially destroy all creatures with power 3 or greater, because obviously we want to keep Plargg in play who's got 2 power. So not only can spells like these protect us, but they also serve another purpose. If one of our opponents only has big creatures, well then all their big creatures are gone. So when we cast Restore Balance, one of the players has 0 creatures, so everyone else has to go down to 0 creatures. It essentially helps us skip a step of having to get down to 0 creatures ourselves. Next up, Planeswalkers are definitely a consideration for this deck. They are not affected at all by Restore Balance. And if they're basically the only things left on the board, they can have a huge impact and easily win the game from there. So ones like Elspeth Sun's Champion, Ajani Vengeance, and Gideon are definitely Planeswalkers to consider. Elspeth's -3 can destroy all creatures with power 4 or greater. And then after Restore Balance hits, she can make a ton of tokens for us, and then she can make our entire army even bigger and deadlier. And then there's Ajani Vengeance who can lock down a permanent, ping something, or just blow up someone's lands. So even when one player is trying their best to recover, well, we've got other plans for them. And of course, Gideon, like many of the Gideons, can just turn into a creature and smack our opponents for us. And of course, make tokens as well, and an emblem, and you get what I mean. There are plenty of Planeswalkers to consider if that's a direction that you want to go with this kind of a deck. Now, also, cards that you really want to consider for this deck are going to be lands that can sacrifice themselves. In fact, I would lean very heavily on them, because if you don't have to depend on something else like Greater Gargadon to sacrifice your lands, you can basically always guarantee that you can get rid of them for Restore Balance. And making all of your opponents lose all their lands is definitely the most brutal thing that you can do with that spell. So a card like Archaeological Dig, which only taps to add a colorless, is still great because you can tap and sacrifice it to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Crystal Vein can also just tap for colorless, or you can tap and sacrifice it for 2 mana. And then Dwarven Runes is basically the same but for red, but it comes into play tapped. So this might be a bit slower, and some lands that you need to consider for this deck might be a bit slower, but that's okay. Again, with this kind of a deck, slow and steady truly does win the race. Don't put a target on your back, let your opponents build up their things, and then get rid of all their things. You'll be prepared for it, and your opponents will not be. But again, do not play this deck unless your opponents are okay with this type of a deck. Mass land destruction is not okay with a lot of Commander players. Again, there's a reason that the actual balance is banned. But again, if your playgroup's okay with it, then go for it. And now it's your turn to help out. So in the comments below, I would love to hear from you. Let me know if this is the best way to break Plargg, or is there a better way? Regardless, let me know what other cards or strategies that you'd consider. I can't wait to hear from you and see what you come up with, and again, thank you in advance. And with that, the show has come to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you, so make sure you comment below and let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one.